When you think of desperados and train robberies in the Old West, you might think of Jesse James or Butch Cassidy.
But there's also a story out of Southern Oregon. It led to what some called the world's greatest manhunt. In tonight's Oregon Century 1.5, Newswatch 12's Ron Brown has the story of another gang that pulled off what some call the Last Great Train Robbery.
October 11th, 1923, a day when nothing seemed to go right for three brothers trying to make their mark on the rapidly changing post-war world. 19-year-old Hugh and 23-year-old twins, Ray and Roy d'Entremont, decided they could become rich and famous at the same time by holding up the Southern Pacific Mail and Passenger Train number 13, the so-called Gold Special. Looking back, the three seemed ill-prepared and equipped to do the job right.
Previous summer, they thought they might rob a bank, and while they were casing the bank, a car pulled up that kind of made them a bit upset. Why was this car blocking their view? Turned out the people in the car went in, robbed the bank, and came running back while the boys were still standing there casing the bank. So they really were not the best experienced criminals.
But rumors of $500,000 in gold on the Gold Special led them to stop Train 13 in the middle of Tunnel 13. Planting a charge of dynamite at one end of the mail car, the explosion destroyed much of the car, started a fire, filled the tunnel with smoke, and killed the mail clerk. They also gunned down three other train workers who ran to see what happened. The d'Entremont brothers ran for their hideout cabin with blood on their hands and not a dime from the attempted holdup. And a massive manhunt was soon underway.
It was called at the time the world's greatest manhunt. It took the law enforcement almost 4 years and $500,000 to locate the brothers. They knew within 9 days who they were looking for based on the evidence left behind at the crime scene.
But newspaper accounts indicate it was chaos for several days, with police rounding up suspects all up and down the Pacific coast. It was also the first time airplanes were used in a search effort.
If you were a young male, especially if you were with a friend, there were two of you, or worse yet, three, you were hauled in and you better have an alibi.
Fortunately, they all did. Some 9 million wanted posters plastered worldwide finally led to the capture of Hugh d'Entremont in the Army in the Philippines. That was 4 years later. He was returned to Oregon to stand trial.
4 years had passed and some of the emotions were not running quite as high. So Hugh was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison. By the time the sentence was pronounced, the twins had been found and brought back. They decided they would confess for the fear that they might be hung. So they confessed and all three were sentenced to life in prison.
But the trial was the talk of the country. Reporters flocked to Jacksonville from all up and down the Pacific coast, even New York. It was the last major trial in the old Jacksonville courthouse because the county seat had recently been moved to Medford. Today, wreaths hang at the mouth of the tunnel in memory of the train workers who died so long ago. You have to wonder if things might have been a little bit different if the d'Entremont brothers would have waited just a couple more days until October 13th to come to Tunnel 13 to hold up train number 13. And maybe this old tunnel has a streak of bad luck associated with it anyway, because it was almost 80 years later that it caught fire. On November 17th of 2003, the tunnel caught fire, either from an arsonist or someone who just lit a warming fire too close to the big redwood timbers inside. It took a couple weeks to put the smoldering fire out. Much of the tunnel had collapsed, and it wasn't until April of 2005, almost a year and a half and some $15 to $18 million later, that the tunnel reopened. It's still open now, but no trains are using it. Shippers in the Central Oregon and Pacific are in a standoff over shipping rates, and the future of the historic Siskiyou line is still up in the air. At the Siskiyou Summit, Ron Brown, Newswatch 12.
Hugh d'Entremont died of stomach cancer shortly after he was paroled in 1958. Roy was pronounced schizophrenic and remained in prison the rest of his life after brain surgery. Ray was paroled and spent the last 23 years of his life quietly near Eugene.